Story 1. Trump cannot close the Department of Energy by executive order. Expect lawsuits and a judge ruling for rehiring. The question is whether U.S. laws are strong enough to withstand Trump's actions. I find it amusing that the Republican Party will not bring this up in Congress because they know it would fail. Story 2. I work at a Title I school, and I'm concerned. I'm already seeing the school prepare to let staff go. Many people do not realize how much the Department of Education supports underprivileged children. For instance, many Title I schools receive up to 25% of their funding from the Department of Education. We provide take-home meals for families in need, and those services might be cut. Our art program is consistently underfunded, and the situation is likely to worsen. It looks very bleak from within the field of education. Story 3. I believe many people supporting this initiative have no idea what the Department of Education actually does. I also think a great number of those individuals will face a rude awakening when their children cannot receive assistance for their learning, physical, or mental disabilities. Furthermore, the lack of funding for schools in underprivileged communities will only exacerbate the situation. It is going to be challenging. Story 4. People will not be happy when their property taxes increase to address the funding shortfall for their schools. Story 5. The middle class exists only because of public education. Private education means that only the wealthy receive an education. This is why it was common for someone to live their entire life without knowing how to read or write. If you want to eliminate the middle class, you must abolish public education. Story 6. There are two types of Republicans: wealthy Republicans and uninformed Republicans. The wealthy Republicans spend all their time keeping the uninformed Republicans uninformed, while the uninformed Republicans spend all their time keeping the wealthy Republicans wealthy. Story 7. Who can gather data to rank states on education? Who can ensure that standards for those who need special education services are enforced and measured? Who controls taxpayer money for lower and middle-class children who need it to become productive members of society or improve their circumstances? Does education lead to a greater leveling of wealth and opportunity? We know who is in charge and who will control our future, and it is not the American people. Story 8. It appears that the main reason he is doing it is to move the Department of Education's $1.6 trillion student debt portfolio to another department so that they can dismantle all debt forgiveness and relief programs and manage it ruthlessly. Trump has said he plans to task the Treasury Department, Commerce Department, or the Small Business Administration with federal student loan management. You can bet they are not going to be lenient or pleasant to deal with. Trump knows that most of the people he will be hurting did not vote for him anyway, and he is going to undermine what little social and economic mobility exists in this country. Those who voted for Trump voted for evil. Story 9. There is no federal education department in Canada. Education is a provincial responsibility. It will now be up to the provinces to handle education. There will likely be significant differences in the quality of education among the provinces. Story 10. The first actions target money laundering, taxes, regulatory bodies, and education, indicating a desire for people to remain uninformed and unable to apply criminal penalties. This is the theft of our public wealth, with the cost being borne by ordinary citizens so that the wealthy can live beyond the law. Story 11. While the Department of Education has its problems, such as the Race to the Top program, Common Core state standards, and an emphasis on test scores, I do not trust the current administration to close it and replace it with a better system. Story 12. The ones who are breaking it do not understand what it does. They believe it is a place that teaches educators to be overly progressive. The powerful individuals who actually know better simply dislike teachers' unions. Story 13. Educated individuals tend to lean towards liberal or leftist ideologies. This seeks to cultivate a more uninformed electorate that will support right-wing candidates. Story 14. If you are a Trump supporter and hear me making fun of Trump supporters, I want you to know I am talking about you personally, and I hope you are offended because I think you are misguided. Here are my thoughts on Donald Trump and those who admire him. Story 15. It's a terrible idea. Reform the department. Don't just eliminate it. Furthermore, that is supposed to be Congress's area of authority, not a made-up group named after cryptocurrency. Story 16. The closure of the Department of Education would greatly improve program implementation in higher education. The department currently manages a student loan debt portfolio of more than $1.6 trillion. This means the federal student aid program is roughly the size of one of the nation's largest banks, Wells Fargo. However, while Wells Fargo has more than 200,000 employees, the Department of Education has fewer than 1,500 in its Office of Federal Student Aid. The department is not a bank and must return banking functions to an entity equipped to serve America's students. Yes, banks are the most trustworthy institutions for supporting education and the future of our country. Story 17. A lot of these parents talking negatively on the city's local gossip Facebook page are about to start homeschooling. They think the school is very bad at everything. They consistently vote against school bonds that would fix the buildings and provide new resources. However, they seem to resent this school district so much for some reason that they hinder any progress and react strongly when there are snow days. I'm really wondering what they're going to do when the little funding the district received is all but wiped out. Say goodbye to the summer lunch program that everyone lines up around the block for. Say goodbye to zero tolerance when it comes to bullying. They think administration does very little. They're partially right. I'll give them that. But what do they expect the administration to do now? There will be no funding for paraprofessionals, no individualized education programs honored as they should be, and no protections for students with disabilities upheld. Some parents seem to believe that the former administration wouldn't possibly go after disabled students. They are mistaken. I would probably lose my job as a custodian. We are a skeleton crew as it is, and a few months before the election, we were supposed to receive a $4 raise from the school board, but the superintendent went behind their backs and gave us a percentage raise instead. They can't even pay us when they are told they need to. I'm likely to be the first to go when the orders come. I fear they will get rid of all but 2 or 3 custodians in each building. I'm the second best employee they have in this building because my coworker cares much more than I do, so she will probably stay since she does significantly more work than I do. Ever since the first hint of this executive order coming for the Department of Education, I've effectively begun to disengage from my job. I've lost all enthusiasm for this position. The students used to be enough. I used to do it to provide them with a clean place to learn, but the administration and higher-ups drain the joy out of it all. I wake up in the morning and wonder, does it really matter, cosmically speaking, if I don't go into work today? Anyway, there's only one private school in this county. The other schools are at least a 40-minute drive away. I don't see that one small school being able to absorb all these kids from nearby towns. So, many will have to be homeschooled or sit in this building that leaks every time it rains, where you can see daylight through a crack in the wall along the stairwell. There's still asbestos in some of the walls, the basement, and the crawl space. But, give the power back to the states. They've had such a great track record so far with public education. Story 18. The American education system has been inadequate for my entire life, but that does not mean I trust the Trump administration to genuinely improve it. Story 19. As a resident of a state that respects and values education, we will mostly be fine. However, states that do not share those values will continue to hinder our progress, just as they always have. We will see renewed pressure to divert public funds to religious schools in an effort to indoctrinate more children, undermine public education, and support those who would send their children to private schools regardless. This is another iteration of the idea that if a Republican endorses or supports something, it is likely to be detrimental to everyone. Story 20. I hope it gets reversed. Such a change cannot be made with the stroke of a pen, and it undermines congressional authority. I support reorganizing the system to make our educational framework effective, leading to improvements in literacy and math skills over several decades. Story 21. I believe it is the most foolish action he is attempting. Anyone who does not immediately support him is uninformed. Story 22. He cannot do it. Furthermore, it should not be done. You want to cut waste and fraud. Fine, but have a clear plan for what you intend to do. Stop attacking everything recklessly. Story 23. Wake County Public Schools in North Carolina, one of the largest public school districts in the country, has informed teachers that due to funding cuts, they will no longer have dental insurance. I fully expect to see many teachers leaving, resulting in significantly higher student-to-teacher ratios. Story 24. I will be completely honest. I do not know exactly what the Department of Education does or what eliminating it would entail. However, it sounds concerning. Story 25, German here. One thing I have noticed over the years is that education is the enemy of conservative or fascist ideas. So it fits. Story 26. Like most government agencies, it was burdened with inefficiencies. However, I am uncertain if it did more good than harm, regardless of the cost. I have seen detailed lists from both sides of the argument, and it appears somewhat dystopian how government operates today. Story 27. If you thought primary care and mental health care were under strain before, just wait until public service loan forgiveness is threatened for medical school loans. Story 28. This is the first step toward dismantling public education and transferring everything to charter and religious institutions. The goal is to undermine teachers' unions and reclaim funds from their donors. Story 29. Many states with conservative governance are likely to have education systems that deteriorate further. Many parents are once again demonstrating a lack of concern for their children's well-being. Story 30. It is a purposeful strategy to keep people uneducated. If you look at voting demographics in the United States, the more educated individuals are, the less likely they are to vote Republican. Story 31. I have said for years that the reason schools stopped teaching civics and government classes was to ensure that children were less informed of their rights and responsibilities as citizens because it is hard to fight to protect your rights if you are ignorant of them. This is exactly the same thing, just on a grander scale. Governments do not want a population capable of critical thinking. They want obedient workers, people just smart enough to run the machines and just dumb enough to passively accept their situation. A George Carlin. Story 32. Public schools in America face significant challenges, which often stem more from state-level issues than from the federal Department of Education. The Department of Education has provided substantial funding for underprivileged children. Closing the Department of Education will only exacerbate the disadvantages faced by these children. If anyone is blaming the Department of Education for the problems in public schools, they should first examine their state's education department. Story 33. Just another shot fired in the continuing Republican war on public education. It seems that conservatives oppose public financing for much of anything beyond police and the military. They oppose education both because of its expense and its consequences. They resist having a national policy on education and the existence of a federal Department of Education, always preferring to push education matters, especially funding and curriculum issues, down to the state level, and from there down to the county, school district, and school board level, where its funding can be undermined through property tax reforms and its curriculum dominated by conservative school board members focused on parental rights, parental choice, and textbook committees. Conservatives tend to view the valid part of education as its role in career preparation and are less interested in the concept of a liberal education, which includes the arts, sciences, and humanities. Liberals favor public financing of post-secondary education for everyone who is qualified and committed to it. Conservatives are opposed. Many conservatives exhibit a deep vein of anti-intellectualism and fear and distrust educated and intelligent people. Conservatives would prefer a market solution for education, such as charter schools or solely private schools, and keep the government out of it altogether. And who can blame them? The costs are immediate, clear, and certain. The benefits are nebulous, dispersed, and longer term. The more educated a person is, the more likely they are to be liberal. The more educated a person is, the more likely they are to be agnostics or even atheists, which contradicts conservative religious values. Most college professors lean liberal rather than conservative. Educated individuals tend to be less hostile to theories in general, specifically those of evolution, climate change, and environmentalism, and are more open to racial and cultural diversity and international cooperation. Many hot-button conservative issues arise from this divergence. Finally, less educated people are easier to manipulate through mass media and astroturf movements. Education represents power and is therefore mistrusted by the power establishment, currently the Republican Party, except as a tool for maintaining their advantage. This is well understood when practiced by authoritarian regimes that suppress secular education and the schooling of girls, but is underacknowledged as a reality in the daily lives of Americans. That war is always waged in the name of reforming education and cutting waste. These could easily be called making it work for my children and excluding undeserving individuals, respectively. Story 34. It is frustrating. I always feel like the federal government keeps states as similar as possible. Without oversight, disadvantaged states will not have comparable educational opportunities to others. Moreover, having each state in charge can negatively impact the curriculum. While I understand that states have different standards, allowing them complete autonomy can exacerbate the existing divisions in American cohesion. Story 35. We do not need any education. The United States will be known as the least informed place on earth soon enough if it is not already. Story 36. 1. Trump cannot achieve this through executive order. Therefore, this is merely theater and a waste of time. This is unwise. The Department of Education is not perfect, but by affecting hundreds of thousands of federal workers, you will ultimately harm millions of children by removing the one thing that allows them to receive a standard education in relative safety and affordability. This is especially concerning in states with lower educational outcomes, where the majority face challenges compared to others. They may become an uneducated workforce. Story 37. It is a bad idea. All children should be able to attend school, regardless of their socio-economic status. This country needs a Department of Education to implement that. Story 38. Last night, Kimmel showed 6 to 7 people who had no idea where Mount Rushmore is or whose faces are on it. It seems more likely that it should be expanded a bit. Story 39. He is not allowed to do this, but until someone imposes consequences on him, he is going to keep behaving like this. This is authoritarianism. His governing by executive order to bypass the legislative branch and ignoring court orders to circumvent the judicial branch consolidates all power in the executive. It is not an exaggeration to call that authoritarianism. That is simply accurate. Story 40. It's a significant step towards privatizing education, which is what they truly desire. Even the threat of dismantling the Department of Education could undermine confidence in public school systems. Communities will not agree to pay higher taxes to schools to compensate for the loss of federal funds. Teachers who are already underpaid and overworked, and who spend their own money on supplies, will give up. These two factors will lead to the closure of the poorest schools, first due to a lack of funding and staffing. Meanwhile, only the wealthiest can afford to send their children to private schools, leaving our new elite with a large uneducated labor force. Story 41. I am a Title I school that is also semi-attached to a military base, which means we can only tax 7% of our population because the other 93% are tax-exempt due to being active duty or living on military-owned land. So we are in a difficult situation. There is a very real possibility that my school will close if we cannot obtain the federal aid we need. Story 42. I am working hard to graduate with my associate degree before there are any issues with my financial aid. I am very close, with only 2 semesters and 3 classes left. I have not had to pay anything thanks to grants, and I cannot afford to lose this opportunity. I also work for a school. We just introduced a free lunch and breakfast program this year, but it will be cut next year. The budget is already tight, and these students deserve better. Story 43. It is anti-constitutional, and if we accept that illegal acts can be carried out by decree, we have an absolute monarchy. I believe absolute monarchies are very harmful. Story 44. It's odd how every year of my life growing up, I have heard repeatedly from everyone about how the Department of Education and its policies or systems have been ineffective. This criticism has come from both teachers and students. Yet suddenly, when a politician that people do not like is involved, there is an uproar. Story 45. Republicans need to ensure that future generations do not develop critical thinking skills if they want to be elected. Story 46. Sad. Yes, the Department of Education needed to be reimagined because it is still based on outdated ideas that no longer serve us as they should. However, shutting it down without any plan will only make things worse. Children who are not supported may resort to destructive actions just to feel a sense of warmth. Story 47. It was a significant waste of money. Test scores have either remained the same or decreased, and states have largely been responsible for their own curriculum. Farewell to wasted tax dollars. Story 48. Americans are struggling with serious issues in their education system. The right response is to dismantle and rebuild the school system. However, some are resistant to change. Story 49. I live in a deep red county. My neighbors will be quite upset when their child or grandchild no longer has any help with their individualized education programs. Our tiny village's school system currently has an amazing special education program. So many people move here to send their kids to our schools. They will be very upset when all the teacher assistants lose their jobs. We certainly can't afford to maintain those programs based on our state and local funding. Our lottery tickets are supposed to fund the school system, but even the people around here don't buy that many scratch-off tickets. This is what I think about when I see all the political shrines in people's yards. Story 50. It is ridiculous. Only a fool would think this is a good idea. If you do not like the direction education is heading, change it for the better. Do not shut it down. Story 51. Headlines should say, "This is the job of Congress." Ignore that individual, instead of focusing on what Trump will do. Story 52. I'm mainly worried about my job at this point. I cannot go into many details, but the company I work for handles both manufacturing and education for schools and businesses. We receive grants for our educational materials, and schools obtain grants to purchase our materials, so that part of the business may be heading for a downturn. The other part is also likely to decline due to tariffs. It was somewhat amusing to see our CEO stressed about this, considering he initially supported all of it. Story 53. I believe we still need a centralized entity that is focused on matters of public education. Simply eliminating the Department of Education is not productive. If it is not functioning effectively, solutions should be sought to improve its performance. One reason I think the United States lags behind other countries in education is due to the inconsistent quality of education based on location. Implementing standardized testing was not the most effective approach to improvement, but that does not mean we should eliminate the Department of Education altogether. Story 54. I am feeling very upset. I believe I will no longer receive an education because I am autistic. This makes me feel dehumanized. Story 55. Another elimination without a plan. There are no strategies for transferring the functions of the department to other departments. This will only lead to people getting hurt. Story 56. Schools barely have enough individualized education program support. Eliminating that funding would make it challenging for anyone with children who need extra one-on-one time with an expert. Story 57. My sense from the last couple of decades of Republican policy and propaganda is that their goal is to end public education so they can funnel public money to private corporations and religious institutions while also breaking public sector educator unions in the process. Everything they do in education serves these two goals, so that is the lens through which I view all their actions. Story 58. As a non-American, can someone explain something to me, please? When Trump was running for his first term, he promised a lot, but once in office, it appeared to me as an outsider that he was doing very little. There was a lot of golf and many appointments made for friends and family to benefit financially. He built a few miles of the wall that he seemed so obsessed with. Now, in his second term, he is getting a lot done, evil actions in my opinion, but it is being accomplished. He seems much more active this time around, still playing a lot of golf, but it appears he is busier. However, I have not heard anything about the wall since he took office. Not a word. Has that project been abandoned? I can't imagine him dropping it without loudly announcing it. Any ideas? Story 59. The project aims to transform public services into private services, allowing funds to be directed into private hands without oversight. Story 60. The Trump administration is trying to undermine the government using every means at his disposal, and some that are not. He also seems to be attempting to harm the economy, along with American influence in the world. The Republicans are creating a situation that may never be resolved. Only time will tell what the long-term outcome will be, but it likely won't be positive. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is wondering whether we've lost our sanity. As for my thoughts, I'm glad I'm not of college age, needing financial aid, or a disabled child, or the parent of a disabled child. Unfortunately, I am nearly retirement age and was planning to live on Social Security in another country. Now, I don't know if I'll be able to rely on that. The damage these individuals are causing will affect many people. Story 61. Of course, it's illegal and a bad idea. It is a very troubling situation for the direction our country is heading. Unfortunately, their entire plan is to overwhelm the system, making it difficult for anyone to take action. Courts will take a long time to rule on these matters, and even once they do, the administration may have already pushed everything through by proceeding or ignoring the laws. If there is no one to enforce these laws and prevent them from breaking the law, they will just continue. By the time the courts have ruled, it may be too late. Story 62. It is an outrage and a travesty. It is an egregious crime against future generations and a deliberate attempt to undermine the population. Story 63. Some states cannot even provide clean water, yet we expect quality education. The decline of America continues. Story 64. We all know what needs to be done, but no one will say it for the risk of being targeted. Everyone is thinking it, though. Story 65. We used to be first or second in the world in education before the Department of Education. Now we are 25th. I have 2 children who are still in school, and I would like to see some changes. Story 66. I am a former school board director. The Department of Education's biggest benefit to schools is the funding they provide for programs. As long as the funding continues through some other mechanism, most districts will be fine. My concern is that funding will be withheld unless districts adopt politically motivated guidelines. The department also conducts research and helps districts stay informed about national education trends and new curriculum ideas. This can be replaced by other organizations, but the department's research carries weight. Story 67. I have no problem with aggressive and effective reform. However, it is reckless and sloppy to eliminate the mechanisms in place without a ready alternative solution. Story 68. Oh, things are about to get very intense for parents of children with special needs who voted for him. Story 69. If the goal is to insert a religious curriculum without any barriers, then I am a bit concerned. I am one of those individuals that some Christians dislike, and knowing a whole new generation could be influenced to despise my existence does not sound encouraging. I understand that not all Christians are like this. I have many Christian friends and family members who are wonderful people, so please direct those comments elsewhere. It is the others who are the issue. Story 70. As a public teacher, I am more curious about the allocated congressional funding under the Every Student Succeeds Act and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Both laws create national legal obligations for schools, and the congressional funding was meant to enable schools to implement and continue providing for those laws. Without the funding, the laws remain in place and must be followed. Parents can sue if they are not upheld, which creates a significant concern. If schools are individually responsible for the funding, it could lead to an increase in property taxes. Story 71. Indifference with malice is the best statement for this. You would think that anyone who works for the public sector in government would try to improve the quality of life for everyone, but evidently that is not the case. Story 72. My thoughts are about how the constant attacks on education, economy, and infrastructure support the idea of America first. Is this what conservatives desire? Story 73. Special needs children will be greatly affected if this situation occurs, along with any extracurricular activities or non-essential classes. Additionally, the arts and sports outside of football and basketball will likely be eliminated. Furthermore, low-income children may drop out in large numbers. There will be no regulations ensuring their access to education, and funding for their basic needs will be lacking. The response will likely be a superficial encouragement to improve their circumstances without addressing the real issues. Story 74. Absolutely nonsensical. At the same time this is happening, Florida is making it so high school students do not need to pass 10th grade English to graduate. Education cannot be left solely to the states. There must be standards. Story 75. I want to hear John Roberts explain again how his court did not give Trump free rein to do whatever he wants. Story 76. America is facing significant challenges. Imagine the least literate Americans on social media, and consider that they are part of the 79% of Americans who can read. Even prompt engineering requires the person writing the prompts to have basic literacy skills. The market is continuously declining, skilled workers are losing jobs, and there is a lack of new skilled workers being cultivated. Experts have noted America's inability to compete with other countries that have better, more robust public education systems, leading to a situation where we are falling further behind. Story 77. As a parent of a daughter with special needs who is finishing pre-K, I find this situation terrifying. It puts school districts in a difficult position, as I see no feasible way for the current funding to reach the states. Ultimately, this will harm the children we, as a country, should be protecting. I am not sure many people truly care about these kids, though. Story 78. Look at all of Trump's actions. They are all geared toward reversing Brown versus Board of Education and reviving separate but equal segregated education. This includes school vouchers and more. It is a sick, evil long-term plan. Supporters of this agenda are patient, just as they were with Roe versus Wade. Unfortunately, the Democrats continue to be oblivious and unaware of the threat. Story 79. The Department of Education provides meals for children who do not have enough food at home and usually supplies at least one meal on the weekend. It also helps abused children escape bad situations due to mandatory reporting. The support for special needs is also concerning. Children in poverty are at risk. Disabled children are at risk. Closing the Department of Education will directly lead to more children in danger, and it appears that there is a lack of concern from some policymakers. Story 80. The Republican Party's poor and middle-class supporters believe this will enable them to teach children to think like themselves. Wealthy Republican allies think they can create an uneducated permanent underclass that is too uninformed to challenge them. However, they have all been deceived. Story 81. It feels pointless. The department's responsibilities will be transferred to the Treasury, and nothing will change. All it is doing is causing chaos during the transition. I do not understand why the Republican Party dislikes the Department of Education so much. This is their third attempt to eliminate it. Story 82. There is no upside. This is the endgame that the Republican Party has been trying to implement since Ronald Reagan took office, and probably before. They have manufactured consent by consistently defunding public education nationwide, which ensured poor performance and further justified continued cuts. They have bombarded their base with falsehoods about schools being breeding grounds for Marxist theory and child grooming. Now they can send it back to the states, so there is no more standardized education across any socioeconomic levels, which will further entrench the already vast discrepancies between affluent white communities and all the others. It is a form of social engineering under the guise of eliminating government waste. Story 83. I don't think the people who want it closed understand what it actually does. Much of what I hear as reasons to close it is primarily controlled by the states or even locally. We have an uninformed electorate and leadership, and this is only going to cause more chaos, at least in the short term. I'm okay with thoughtful and planned reform or closure of the Department of Education, but I'm concerned for all those who will be hurt by this approach. Story 84. I always count on Trump to make the worst decision. He has never let me down. Instead of taking a realistic look at the debt and working through solutions, let's just shut it down and fire everyone. This solves nothing and creates new problems. Truly the worst decision. Story 85. I believe that funding should be reallocated to state and county governments to better support teacher salaries. Reducing unnecessary bureaucratic overhead could help make the education system more efficient and effective. Since the inception of the Department of Education, our global standing in education has declined. While the idea of a centralized education department may have merit, in practice, it has struggled to achieve its intended goals. There is room for improvement in our education system, and my hope is that we can find ways to better support both educators and students. Story 86. The federal department assured the United States government that all students will receive an education. This was supported by federal funding. It significantly assisted districts in keeping students in school and provided considerable support for special education students. Without these protections and funds, each state can decide whom they will educate and how to allocate state funds to each district. Story 87. The problem is that we risk losing another generation of children. The damage is already done. I see the effects that the COVID-19 pandemic had on my 20-year-old. She is unprepared for life. We raised these children for a future that no longer exists. People's lives and futures are serious matters. Until we utilize education to prepare children for the workforce and financial literacy, we have no future. They are the future like links in a chain. Story 88. The people praising this as a return of education to the states don't know what the Department of Education actually does. Curriculum is already determined at the state level. One of the functions of the Department of Education is to ensure that students with disabilities and underserved communities have the same access to education as everyone else. Prior to the Department of Education, it was left to the states to decide whether a child with autism or a child with Down syndrome would receive an appropriate education or simply be institutionalized, which was the practice for a long time. The Department of Education also manages Pell Grants and funding for college students. My biggest concern is that individualized education program protections and Section 504 protections, which are enforced by the Department of Education, may be mishandled, leaving children who truly need accommodations and services to fend for themselves. We've seen time and again that this administration does not have a plan for what happens next after they take a sledgehammer to important programs. Instead of discarding everything, why not conduct a thorough audit? It's very disturbing to think that some states will provide opportunities for the disabled and low-income individuals while others will not. That is a significant problem for me. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.